Hi there, and welcome to Faces of Gene Therapy. I'm Eric Paulson, chair of the Institute for Gene Therapies. As we know, gene therapy is no longer a distant scientific promise. It is becoming a real-world reality for patients and for families facing some of the most serious and rare diseases. But innovation alone isn't enough. Getting these life-changing therapies from the lab to the people who need them requires smart policy, thoughtful regulation, sustainable payment models, and most importantly, listening to the voices of those who are most affected. So, in this series, we're bringing together patient advocates and scientists, clinicians, policymakers, and industry leaders to explore how gene therapies are moving from discovery to delivery and what still stands in the way. We're having candid conversations about regulatory pathways, newborn screening, access and equity, defining value, and how collaboration across sectors can accelerate progress. Each of these conversations is focusing on a core challenge or opportunity in the gene therapy ecosystem with one goal in mind: ensuring that these transformative therapies are reaching patients as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. I'm excited today because my guest is Dr. Wendy Chung. Dr. Chung is a chief of the Department of Pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital and the Mary Ellen Avery Professor of Pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Chung is a physician scientist and directs NIH-funded research programs in human genetics of birth defects, including congenital diaphragmatic hernia, esophageal atresia, congenital heart disease. She leads a large study of autism called SPARK and a study of 180 rare neurogenetic conditions called Simon's Searchlight. She's led studies to improve newborn screening for spinal muscular atrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and now Guardian, which is genomic uniform screening against rare diseases in all newborns. Dr. Chung strives to bring genomic information to all patients to inform their care and allow each patient a tailored care plan to achieve their best health and full potential. So let's dive right in and hear more on some of her unique perspectives on gene therapy. We are seeing today gene therapies are moving from scientific possibility to real world treatment for patients that have lifelong, challenging genetic diseases. But from your perspective, as both a clinician and a researcher, what makes this moment so transformative for families who previously really had little or no hope for effective treatment options?
So the first is that I'd say that we've done this on scale for certain conditions. And I look back to spinal muscular atrophy that used to be the most common genetic cause of death for children less than 2 years of age. And now it's just a very different world for those individuals. And I've thought about what we could do in terms of learning from that experience. The other that is exciting to me is there are technologies available that I think of as platform technologies where we're trying to learn as much as we can from one condition and apply it to other conditions to increase the speed with which we move forward. So it's really the collective across rare diseases where we're helping each other out and realizing these synergies. And we are seeing traction in individual conditions and affecting different parts of the body, different modes of action or mechanisms of action in a technical way, that all of these we're using to, I call it drafting, the way other conditions are being able to ride on the coattails of others that have gone before. And as we have certain, I'll call them breakthroughs, but major advances, it'll be what I call a step function. So not just that we're making these small incremental moves forward, but all of a sudden doors will open and a whole bunch of things will be open to the future for patients and their families. And that's exciting to me.
It's very exciting. And you mentioned speed moving forward. Many rare and genetic diseases are progressive, meaning that delays in diagnosis or treatment can lead to irreversible harm. Can you talk a little bit about the Care Until Cure initiative and speak to the importance of early detection, including newborn screening and genomic testing, in order to help ensure that patients are accessing gene therapies to the point where they can provide the greatest possible benefit?
So I've thought about this for my really career, about 35 years, and tried to think about what we were going to need for the future. And I started the Genomic Newborn Screening Initiative, so-called Guardian, knowing that, as you said, there may be windows of maximal impact for these genetic therapies that start early. And so how do you also, from an equity point of view, make sure that we leave no one behind? And newborn screening, that infrastructure that's available to me has been the most viable option in terms of incorporating everyone. And we've proven that you can use the dried blood spot, the same dried blood spot we use the Guthrie card for PKU screening, use it for genome sequencing, and have this infinitely flexible platform so that as new conditions are treatable, you can add new conditions for screening at a population-wide basis. So it provides this platform, this system of care, I would say, to allow both screening and diagnosis even before symptoms, as well as being able to recycle and reuse that information should children become symptomatic for the future for things that we don't currently screen for, and minimize the time to diagnosis and hopefully improving outcomes with that. So as long as it's something encoded within the DNA, for the most part, I think we can read it out and be able to make sure that, as I said, we realize the synergies across rare genetic conditions.
Wow. Let me follow up with another question. One of the major themes that we hear from families is that scientific breakthroughs alone are not enough if patients can't realistically access them. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers today, whether they're regulatory or reimbursement related, infrastructure based, or educational, that still stand between patients and potentially life-changing gene therapies?
So cost is the big issue. Many of these conditions, understandably, are now cost $2 million or some very large amount of money because the companies that have invested in them really have invested a lot in the underlying technology, the regulatory steps that are necessary to get FDA, EMA approval, and it is expensive to be able to do, and they have to be able to essentially make back that investment. What I get very concerned about, though, are what I call too rare to care. That is, all those conditions that are really not common enough for companies to invest in them. And will they be left behind, even though we may be at the precipice of these breakthrough technologies, ways of being able to identify people. And so we are thinking about how can we have baskets, bundles, as I said, sort of very similar conditions by what organ or cell type we need to target, what the mechanism is for treatment, and how do we bundle these together to minimize the burden that we all have to face and be able to combine essentially or bundle or have baskets where we can think about whether it's things that affect the livers, the eyes, the ears, the heart, similar mode of action, similar way that we'll deliver the genes so that maybe the toxicities will be the same and maybe we don't have to repeat all of those experiments individually. Maybe we can learn from each other as we're doing this and get better faster and with less expense. And in doing so, we also have to realize that this is something that is not just research, it's clinical care. And so as we think about payers and how to be able to pay for this, in the same way, I think of it as children with cancer and how we have children on protocols and research protocols for new innovative therapies. Yet we also charge part of this cost to insurance because it's clinical care. How do we think of rare disease treatment in a similar vein? And so I do think that provides the sustainability if we can decrease the cost per person, realize these synergies, and then also be able to appropriately distribute the cost to payers, as well as the investments we're making from research. Really, the whole community's got to come together to make this work.
And you highlighted the investment that goes into creating a new therapy, for instance, and gene therapies are often described as one-time or potentially curative treatments, but they also challenge the traditional healthcare and payment systems that were built around chronic care treatment models. And so, what changes do you think are needed across the healthcare system so we're keeping up with the science to better support the long-term patient access to these innovative therapies?
So this is one of the interesting things as I travel the world. And there are certain countries where, from a healthcare and public health point of view, single payer systems where someone's really responsible for that person for life, the same challenges don't come up. I'll be very honest. It tends to be something that's even more of an issue here in the United States, and where an insurance company may only insure a life for 2 to 3 years and then it gets passed on to the next person. I worry, and I really, really worry about this, that the cheapest thing to the system is someone who's dead. And that's just not right. We can't think about it just in terms of those dollars and cents and someone who might be covering a life for a short period of time. So I won't say that I have all the answers, but we do need to drive down the cost of this care that we're providing. It's not sustainable if we have, say, 5% of children who are born with a rare genetic condition that could be treated by these. We're not going to be able to afford $2 million per child to do that. We've got to figure out a way of being able to decrease the cost in doing that. But I'll also say that the cost for these patients, whether it's healthcare costs, educational costs, the burden on families and individuals in terms of lost time from work and productivity, it is oftentimes more than $1 or $2 million. And so when you think about it holistically, we're actually net ahead if we really could cure these conditions. So we do have to be able to think about this holistically, and we have to align incentives and perhaps have a pooled risk model that as we're thinking about this, so that it's not every small business who's taking on this risk, but how we can be able to spread out that risk to many people. And as I said, hopefully over time, in a safe and effective way, bring down the cost significantly. So we, even from a single payer point of view, or from each insurance point of view, can afford to pay for these.
Oh, that makes sense. And from a holistic value perspective, at IGT, we've been focusing on the value proposition that gene therapies bring, for instance. And so as you look ahead, what is giving you the most optimism about the future of gene therapy? And then what steps should policymakers and researchers, clinicians, our patient advocates, and our leaders in industry be taking right now to ensure the promise of these therapies are actually becoming a reality for more patients and families in the years ahead?
So I am optimistic that I do think it's the convergence of many things. Convergence in terms of, as I was saying, earlier screening, better diagnosis, families coming together to be empowered and to be actively involved in moving things forward, both scientifically, advocacy in terms of policy. The United States federal administration right now with the FDA is, I think, signaling that it these are not too rare to care, that they do care about rare diseases, and that being able to put these together and realizing these synergies, I do think we'll have opportunities that we've not had heretofore. And it's really our responsibility as a community to figure out how to come together, how to realize these opportunities in ways that I think of as platforms. So perhaps, and I know this is a radical idea, but maybe we're not thinking of these as individual rare diseases, but maybe we can think about platforms that share in terms of some of the risks and some of the targets and the strategies for going forward, so that we don't have to put together any one inborn error of metabolism, for instance, that's involved in the liver. Maybe we can think about this as a collective of all of those recessive conditions where it's the same strategy in terms of gene addition or base editing or whatever the platform is, but being able to think about those as a collective with similar both opportunities as well as risks, and be able to pool our experience together and learn from each other as we're going forward. I don't see any other way of being able to achieve our goals if we continue to be fragmented for each one of the, whatever you want to say, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 and counting rare genetic diseases. We just don't have enough resources unless we work together. But that's what I'm optimistic about in this era of AI, of people working as a collective, being empowered, rolling up our sleeves and getting things done. The technology is there. We've seen it work in cell lines, animal models, and now a few times in people. And I do think we're at coming to an inflection point. And when that happens, I'm very excited. I personally, we have a lot to do before in my career, in my lifetime. So I'm committed to helping us get it done.
Well, Dr. Chung, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today and sharing your expertise, and most importantly, for your continued work in this field. You're an important face for our gene therapy series, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for what you do as well.
That's